And it was brutal. Like, it was a brutal awakening. People physically spitting in our direction when they saw us coming. I remember clearly this one couple saw us, stopped, looked at us, and then crossed the road immediately because they didn't want to cross our paths. And it was the first time that Sandra and I had ever visually experienced almost like hatred for the two of us being together.
You are listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.
Hello listeners and welcome to the Under the Rug podcast. So excited to have you today. Today's going to be a fun one. We live in a very diverse world. Here in Victoria in particular, our city acts as a melting pot of culture and ideas. It truly is amazing to live in such a vibrant landscape, yet things haven't always been this way. The idea of courting or marrying someone from a different culture, religious background, or even skin tone was a concept that was, up until very recently in many societies, considered to be taboo or problematic. As such, conversations surrounding mixed or interracial relationships remain oftentimes woefully unexplored. Nalini is in a fairly unique position, being both the daughter of a mixed couple and also being in a mixed relationship herself. Nalini.
Hey.
How are you going?
I am so good. I'm chuffed that we're doing this topic, actually. I think it's really needed.
I think so too. I think this will be a fun one.
Yeah.
I guess we might just dive straight into it. So what is a mixed or intermarriage or interracial marriage?
Okay, so I obviously went on to Cambridge Dictionary to find the correct definition and could not find mixed marriage, funnily enough, but they did have intermarriage. So, intermarriage is defined as marriage between people who are from different social groups, races, or religions.
Okay, there we go. So how does a mixed marriage or intermarriage differ from a marriage between two people of the same race or cultural background or social group?
Yeah, okay. So, I am Anglo-Indian. So, my dad is Indian, my mum is English, and I have married a Mozambican man who is part Mozambican, so native Mozambican, part Chinese, and part Mauritian.
There's quite a few things going on there.
There's a lot happening, right? A lot happening here. His dad was raised in a Catholic school, so it was like a boarding school where he lived and was raised. And his mum would have been raised with relatives of her mum. And so culturally, they had a very sort of Portuguese influence, right? Mozambique was a Portuguese colony. Whereas I've had a very Indian/British upbringing. So a lot of, funnily enough, very traditional Hindu sort of principles and beliefs coupled with Christian principles and beliefs. And then we've kind of merged the two together. So when you ask the question, what are the differences between? Well, I think personally, it's really down to, aside from looks, it would be definitely belief systems. And I think when you marry into someone who is from your culture and understands your culture, I think there is an ease with that. Whereas we had to navigate that with quite a little bit of friction now and again.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, because it's like a systems level change, isn't it? It's like everything all the way down from like the biggest decisions all the way down to the stuff that's happening on the factory floor.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a little bit different to a bit different.
Yes. You said it.
Interesting. Did you find joy in that exploration process?
Oh, 100%. Oh, absolutely. And I think we're better for it.
Yeah.
And I think actually we have got this incredible knack to be able to relate with any culture. You know, there's no barriers, there's no walls. You know, we don't sit on the opposite side of a table of somebody from a completely different cultural background and have that awkwardness of, okay, what do we talk about?
I was listening to a podcast recently, actually, where they were talking about something similar about you get people from the country bumpkin states in the United States versus people from New York,
Right.
who are having to stand in breathing proximity of every culture under the sun on the subway every single day.
Right.
People of different cultures, of different socioeconomic levels, and how that constant close proximity almost makes it impossible to really hate anyone
Yes,
who's around you.
Absolutely. And yet when you're not exposed to it,
Then there's like almost a fear of the unknown.
yes. Yes.
Oh, interesting. Well, speaking of fear of the unknown and country bumpkin mentalities, I guess your mum, being a very white, very British lady from Norfolk with her funny accent, and your dad being a very brown man from India with his funny mustache, they come from a time before both of us, and things were quite different back then. So what were some of the public struggles that your parents would face? That could be stuff like perception from others, real experiences with racism, and I guess your parents' two separate families and their views on their relationship.
Interestingly enough, I don't think they had very many confronting challenges when they first met because they actually met in Africa.
Interesting.
So there's this Indian man who's gone out to this African school to teach maths, physics, chemistry. And then there's this English woman who's come from England to this same school to work in the kitchen and teach the staff. She had like a team of chefs and what have you, and teach the staff on, you know, cuisine and da-da-da. And so they actually met on this, I guess, neutral playing ground, really.
Where both of them are the weirdos.
Correct. So it was almost expected, you know, that these two were it was inevitable. They were gonna meet up and connect and fall in love. And everyone around them loved them and accepted them, and there was no issue.
Interesting.
It probably wasn't even a second thought, to be honest with you. And it's so reflected in their wedding photos, actually. You can see that everyone is just celebrating these two, and it was just the best thing ever. When they were hit with it was when they decided to go back to their motherlands and introduce their new partners.
Wow.
That's when I think it dawned on them that, oh, wow, we've done something quite odd here. That's, funnily enough, frowned upon.
Interesting. So they almost weren't aware.
Yes, and whenever they've shared the story with me over the years, I've always had this sense that there was almost an element of shock that they weren't just welcomed home. And, you know, Dad's choice bride wasn't just welcomed with open arms. There was a struggle there. So they started off in the UK, and I reckon my dad probably was one of the first few Indians to step foot in Norfolk. We're not talking London. Yeah, we're talking like the north. And so it would have been a huge shock for my mum's family to meet this man. So they did the best that they could. I think for my dad going back to England, it was actually easier than it was for my mum going to India. I think the you know, the British are very polite, and so, you know, they would have put on their best manners and done their level best to try and receive this man who ate funny food and, you know, wasn't a big fan of bangers and mash and so they actually tried to make a go of it in England and settle down and do life there. But Dad would have had the stares, you know, the white milkman dropping off the milk and this very Indian male coming to the front door to receive the milk. it would have been very blatantly obvious that, oh, okay, hang on a second, what's happening here, right? So it would have been extremely confronting for them in those early days. And I know for my dad, bless him, I think at the end of the day, for England, for him, it was just the weather. He couldn't handle the weather. It was just too cold. Anyway, so they then moved to India and spent time in India. And that was really where my mum got to learn the culture and got to learn how to cook the food. Because, when they first got married, I mean, dad was cooking his own curries and mum was making her own bangers and mash. That's just how it was. And so for them going to India, it was a huge shift.
And you've mentioned in the past that your mum kind of dove headfirst into the cooking aspect. Could you just give like a real quick recap of what she got up to there? Because it's quite fascinating.
No, it's crazy. I mean, look, my dad's mum really did take her under her wing and taught her the cuisine. So my mum literally learned how to make the chapatis and from scratch, learned all about the spices and what to mix with what, and made all these yummy dals and lentils and fantastic curries. My dad shares stories of how when he was younger, he would have to go out into the field and collect fresh cow poo. Right? Take this fresh cow poo home and leave it out in the sun for it to dry so that they could actually cook with it. That was their fuel to light the fire. So my mom learned all of that. So in terms of immersing herself into the culture, she didn't hold back. I mean, she was this young, 20-something, young, spirited woman who was passionate about her new man and wanted to delve straight into the culture. But understand that for my dad, I mean, there was an arranged marriage all planned for him. Right. He was the firstborn son. There was a certain level of expectation, on his shoulders culturally, just off of their background, that he now rocking up with this Western woman wearing a miniskirt. I mean, it certainly didn't go down, let's say, very flowingly.
Very well, yeah. No, I mean, I guess that points directly to the next question I had, because I wanted to know about these private struggles with cultural differences, because we've discussed the more public aspects of Milkman in Norfolk being shocked to see his first Indian man. What were some of the more private things that maybe only unearth themselves after time is spent in company of others? And how did your parents' families learn to reconcile differences?
Yes, okay, I'll start there, because I think over the years, my mum's family and my dad's family have grown to love and accept them. Okay, so now, I mean, there's no barriers, there's no walls. They all get on so well. My dad's sister visited recently, and just seeing her interacting with my mum was just the most beautiful thing. I know whenever I go back to the UK and catch up with family over there, they're always asking after mum and dad, and they speak fondly of my dad now, which is just the best thing. So time definitely heals, right? But I think in terms of private struggles, in terms of cultural differences, and this is certainly something that I've experienced being in a mixed marriage, has really been when it comes to the things that matter in terms of our belief systems concerning our children, because suddenly now that's a thing. Do I believe in discipline or don't I believe in discipline? And does my partner believe in the same methodologies that I believe in when it comes to disciplining our children? And I think that's actually where those private struggles can sometimes rear its ugly head. And the only way to confront it and to deal with it where it doesn't cause distension or division within the marriage is open communication between the two of you, because you need to know where the other one stands and also where you stand on a matter in order for you guys to find a middle ground,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's super important. I guess, let's stick on that for a little while. you and your husband, my dad, have come from very different upbringings. I think it's safe to say that
Yes.
they're about as different as they probably could be for two people living in somewhat close proximity.
Yep.
Let's just go into that a little bit. What does your upbringing look like? And then what does Sandra's upbringing look like?
Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, Sandra is from a more traditional Portuguese upbringing. His parents were Catholic, or his mum particularly was very into the Catholic way of life, and so they raised my husband and his siblings in that way. Very, very traditional. My husband's very much the child is to be seen and not heard sort of mindset. Whereas for me, on the other end, I had a very liberal and influential mother who played a very strong role in my upbringing, and, you know, loved freedom of speech and, you know, wanted to bring out my creativity and my opinion and my ideas. Whereas again, with my dad, he's from a very traditional Hindu background, where again, the children eat in the kitchen after the adults have eaten, you know. So again, it was this constant tug of war almost. And I witnessed this as a child between my parents when it came to what were their beliefs and their chosen methodologies and principles that they were going to teach me, for me to be raised under. Sometimes would actually, you know, they wouldn't necessarily see eye to eye. So, you know, definitely heard a lot of disagreements between my parents. And one thing that my dad said to me, you know, later in my later teenage years before I left home was, we just want to encourage you to take the best of us, leave the worst of us, but take the best of us into your future and into your children, you know, when you get married and have kids, which is fantastic. But yeah, definitely for Sandro, my hubby, and I, he was much more traditional in his way of thinking, and a lot stricter, and, you know, it was very black and white with him. There was no middle ground. Whereas I was very much, no, well, they're getting of the age now, babe, where we can negotiate, you know. He certainly wasn't up for negotiating.
Well, I guess that'd be a funny question for anyone listening as well. Anyone who's in a relationship right now where you're coming from two very different cultural backgrounds. What are your funny stories of these disagreements that you've got? Be it over something small, like how you keep the bathroom, whether you leave the seat up or not, or something that's more fundamental, like the ways that you raise your kids. We would love to hear about that, so do let us know in the comments. And yeah, I guess just sticking on that as well, like how do you navigate those differences in a way that's healthy? And how do you avoid, I guess, fostering any kind of ill will or resentment towards one another when you're trying to navigate potentially really frustrating situations like a rampant toddler, or your kid is being naughty at school, or what have you?
Well, we certainly learnt the hard way, you know, because we had left Africa where all our family was, moved to London, had a baby fairly early on in London. And so we didn't have that support network around us, which was devastating, but also a good thing at the same time, because it meant that we had to forge our own path and we had to figure it out for ourselves. But we got it wrong at the best of times in those early years, because, you know, we would challenge each other in the heat of the moment, you know, and that is not the time to be having the blatant argument with each other in front of the child who you're trying to raise, you know. So we certainly stuffed it up several times, but we learnt over time, because we were just so in love with each other, we wanted to make it work. You see, that makes a big difference. You know, marriage is hard at the best of times, but when you want to make it work, you'll make it work. We learned over time that if, say, for instance, there was something that we disagreed on in the heat of the moment, only after things had settled and we were both calm and in a good headspace would we then approach it with each other. But we would do it from love, not from anger. That was a major turning point for us, not just in our relationship and how conducive it was to our marriage, but also in terms of what we were modeling in front of our children. So we would have that conversation at a later time. And I learned over time to approach it very gently, very softly. I would paint my picture, he would paint his picture, and then we would have to figure out together, well, what is our middle ground when it comes to the children,
Right.
you know, or different situations. Well, not necessarily just kids, but obviously when you have kids, that's a big part of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Then I guess with keeping with this idea of differences, because once again you're having to try and find this middle ground. It's not always the case that those differences are made aware by one another.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're made aware to you by the people around you.
Oof.
So I wanted to know if you and your husband had any kind of public struggles in regards to being in a intermarriage.
Gosh, you know, the one picture that comes to my mind immediately was when we had a conference that we were attending in South Africa one year. And, you know, understand with apartheid and everything in South Africa, I mean, gosh, it was a volatile place for us to go and time for us to go as a mixed marriage couple. And I remember taking a walk down the high street or the town centre, the main strip where all the, you know, the cafes and restaurants and everything are, this one Saturday morning when we had a break at this conference, and people physically spitting in our direction when they saw us coming. I remember clearly this one couple saw us, stopped, looked at us, and then crossed the road immediately because they didn't want to cross our paths. And it was the first time that Sandra and I had ever visually experienced such like animosity and such almost like hatred for the two of us being together. And it was brutal. Like, it was a brutal awakening. And I guess realization that we are so different. Yeah. You know, when you live in it, you don't see it. You know, he's just my man. He's the guy that I've fallen in love with. And I mean, he could have been green for all I care. I love him. And I love how Bob Marley talks about it in his songs. You know, why is it that we can't get to the point where the color of our skin is no different to the color of somebody's eyes? And to me, that's exactly it. And I know we're living in a day now where you can't say, I don't see color. But I think it's because it's been misinterpreted or misunderstood that, you know, when somebody says that, they're not devaluing your race or your culture or the differences. They're not devaluing it. Well, I know for me personally, I'm not devaluing my husband and I's differences or his differences towards me. It's more his color doesn't impact my love for him and my commitment to him and my dedication to him. So when someone is spiteful or portrays any kind of hate towards him, it hurts me as much as it does him, right? It angers me as much as it does him. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm concerned, we are equal, and we're in this thing called life together, and we're just going to do the best that we can with what we have, right?
Yeah. I mean, what more can you do?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was going to move on, but actually I just wanted to ask, because your trip in South Africa, I think, is something that's quite something of a unique experience that maybe a lot of our listeners might not have had to experience something like that themselves.
Yeah.
Do you ever find that the fact that you're a mixed or intermarriage couple is made aware to you even in your life here in Australia? Has that ever been the case? Or is it something that generally is so subtle that it's not really worth even thinking much about.
Really interesting that you ask that. It's very subtle in Australia, whereas it's a little bit more blatant in Africa. Well, particularly South Africa, because we were back in Zimbabwe recently. And in fact, we visited South Africa also very recently. And we didn't have any issues at all or any outward
Because your
responses.
initial trip would have been quite a while back
It
now.
would have been many, many years ago, yes. And there was still a lot of friction just in the nation itself in terms of race. However, having gone back recently, there really wasn't any blatant disregard or distaste towards the two of us being together. Here in Australia, it's very interesting, actually. We have observed that sometimes my husband has greater favor when he's with me than what he gets when he's on his own.
Interesting.
So if we walk into, so let's just paint the picture from a business standpoint for a moment. If I were to walk into a store, one of, a supplier who's supplying us with parts, for instance, for a truck that he's repairing, and it's an unknown supplier, Sandro will be prepared for racism, and I'll explain to you what that looks like, okay? So just remind me if I forget. He'll be prepared for the receiving end of him being present in the room, okay? But if I were to walk in with him, and we've seen this times before, where I'm side by side, if he were to ask one of the tellers or one of the guys in the shop for some help, the guy would respond immediately and we'd get the help that we need and we'd go to the checkout, we'd pay, and then we would leave, and there'd be no issues. But there have been times where he's gone in on his own and he'll get the almost like the beady eyes keeping a look on him. Does that make sense? The sort of, just watching.
Because he mentioned recently a story where he said that he was looking for a plumbing part or something, and the guy at the register was asking a lot of questions and not being very snappy, and saying stuff like, "Oh, like, shouldn't you get a plumber to do this? Like,
yes.
Why do you need that? Why do you need this?"
Yes. Almost like you're black, therefore you're probably not educated enough to even know what you're doing, right? There's been times where he will say, just put it on the business account. And they'll go, oh, do you have authority to put it on the business account? And he'll go, well, I'm the owner of the business. Well, who are you? We need to see your identification, and I understand that, but would they do that if that was me walking in, or if it was one of our white staff members walking in? Would they necessarily have that same level to that degree? Well, show me your driver's license then. And then when he pulls out his driver's license, suddenly when they see the name correlates. Oh, okay. Yes, sir. All right. We'll get that processed for you right away then. And then suddenly now everything shifts. He's had times where people will come in to his business for work to be done, and they will treat him so badly, so disrespectfully. No, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to the boss. I want to speak to your manager. Let me speak to who's above you. Because, he wears his normal overalls. He dresses like the boys. He doesn't come in all hoity-toity. And he loves doing that, actually. It's a bit cheeky, really. And he'll go, no, well, I'm the boss. And they'll, no, we want to speak to, the CEO or, no, this is my company. Oh, it's your company. And And just that in itself,
I think they call that the bigotry of low expectations,
whew,
where it's these comments that don't sound racist or don't sound maliciously charged.
yes,
They
but there's an
imply
undercurrent.
that you shouldn't be proficient enough to do that thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. He had a couple of vehicles on being displayed at a car show recently, and he said it was so interesting how people would come and gawk at the car, and then they'd see him standing there, and they'd go, "Is this your car?" And it was particularly his F truck, right? And that's just a bit of a beast. And so he'd go, yeah, and he just wants to talk about his car and just love everybody, And they'll go, oh, right. And then they'll, sort of try and divert the attention by, drooling over the car. And then a few moments later, they'd go, so what exactly do you do?
Yep. And you wonder if they're asking the same thing of every other person at the convention or...
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know. Super funny.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I was just curious to know about those public struggles because, you guys get to see that firsthand, this contrast between your two experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny actually because it just came to my mind. When the whole Black Lives Matter erupted during COVID, it was so interesting because we had so many people reaching out
Yeah.
and going, "Are you okay?
Yep.
How are you doing with this whole Black Lives Matter issue?" And we're just like, dude, you have no idea. Sandro's lived his life with it. We've lived our married lives facing this on the daily. It's no different. It's just being brought to the surface now. People are just,
Aware of it.
A lot more.
But
Yeah.
it's funny that you get that bigotry of low expectations again in like a different light where it's like true, real compassion, but just not quite the self-awareness needed to know that it looks a bit funny reaching out to the mixed race couple when BLM protests are going on. You want a brownie
Would you like
point?
to go for lunch?
Yeah. Well, I guess moving on then, what would be some of the private struggles that the two of you have kind of had to face? So this could be the same sort of things that your parents went through. Maybe there's something that's unique to the two of you, just in how you guys function as a unit.
Look, I think just in terms of our marriage, I know for me personally, one of my biggest struggles, particularly when we were going through a really difficult situation in our family. Our son was going through a really tough time and, it just had such a catastrophic impact on us all as a family. But the impact it had on our marriage was tough because my husband culturally doesn't talk about things. It could also just be a guy thing, maybe. I don't know. Just doesn't. That sounds terrible, but I think just men and women alone are wired so differently, is what I'm trying to say. But for him, culturally, the wife's in the kitchen, she's cooking, she's cleaning, she looks after the children, the man goes out and works, that's his upbringing. And so we're navigating this really tumultuous time as a family. And for me, my way of coming to terms with what was going on and being able to navigate it was by, or longing, my heart was longing to just come and sit with my husband and have a conversation with him and just go, babe, I'm struggling. I just feel like shite and I just wanted to cry and process, and him hug me and tell me, sweetheart, it's all going to be okay. He doesn't necessarily have to tell me how he's going to fix it, but I just wanted him to tell me it's going to be okay. And instead, it was like this rift between us was beginning to grow, because I was now resenting his background and the fact that I'm just expected to be in the kitchen. Meanwhile, I'm grieving right now and I'm struggling with my reality right now. And I long to just talk about it, but he's not giving me the opportunity to talk. And so that would be a private struggle for me. And I would go to bed crying at night, just desperately wanting to be able to connect with him. He wants sex. I'm like, no ways, mate, because I can't even connect with you emotionally right now, let alone physically. How's that going to work? And so it was creating this separation, as it were, between us, until it eventually, unfortunately, just erupted with me blowing up at him this one evening in the kitchen. I feel terrible that it happened, but at the same time, I feel like it was a pivotal moment for him where he realized, oh gosh, I'm actually being emotionally unavailable to my wife because of my cultural upbringing, because of the cultural differences. And it's not going to work if I'm going to make this marriage work. And from that point in time, things have really shifted for us as a couple, where, now even through the day, he'll call me, how's my babe? How's my wife doing today? The other day got news of a friend who'd lost his wife really unexpectedly, and it was just devastating, and I was mortified by it. And he called throughout the day just to check in. Hey, I know you woke up this morning with really bad news. How are you doing? Gosh, us girls need that sort of thing, I think regardless of whether you're mixed married or not, there's that emotional connection and that those cultural differences that can put blockages in us emotionally connecting with one another. For some people, even physically connecting with one another. Maybe your cultural background demands that physical connection looks X, Y, and Z, but to your partner, it's actually A, B, and C. So being able to have the freedom for the two of you to come together, have those conversations, talk about each other's differences, listen to one another, give each other the space. Don't interject and go, oh yeah, but, because that's not going to help. Let her talk. Let him talk. And then between the two of you, find that common ground, because he asked, he said, so what do you need me to do? Because I can't fix this. I can't fix what our family is facing right now. And I'm going, I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to hold me and tell me you're with me and we're going to be okay. And so, yeah, I think that's probably the one thing that just came to my mind when you asked the question about private struggles is, regardless of whether you're mixed, married or not, don't have private struggles as a couple. Talk about those struggles. Talk about them, bring them to the surface so that the two of you can work through it together as a single unit. Then your marriage will work. Gosh, we're going to be celebrating 25 years next year.
Wow. That's
Can't
impressive.
believe it. I know.
Yeah.
Can't believe it.
I'm surprised.
Thank you.
No, awesome. Yeah, well, just as you're saying, like it's so important to make sure that those private struggles are made known and that individuals and relationships aren't hoarding ill will or resentment and then exploding on their partners.
Yes, absolutely. But I'll add to that because, there could be some girls or even some guys listening today and going, oh my gosh, there's no ways I could open up to my partner about this because they would just laugh in my face or they would mock me or their culture would come to the surface and go, oh, for goodness sake, toughen up, princess, I think it's important then that even if it's at a romantic dinner or whatever, you set the tone and you explain, listen, I want to be able to open up to you. But when you shoot me down with your sarcasm or your toughen up, facade, it actually shuts me down. And then I continue to struggle in silence. I'm not then going to be inclined to want to open up to you if you're just going to lambaste me or tease me or mock me. So it's important to be able to communicate that as well. It's not just deal with the issues, but actually take it a step back and go, look, I really want to deal with the issues with you, but at the moment, I know what I'm going to get from you, and that's not going to help. So here's what needs to change first. Once we can tackle this, then we can start looking at the real issues.
It's kind of like doing an exercise with bad form, isn't it?
Yes.
You're not going to get the benefits of your workout.
Absolutely. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. I guess then just in closing, because I think that's a really, really good point to kind of wind things down on. Do you have any words of encouragement or wisdom for people who are in mixed relationships, intermarriages, relationships where there's some complexity or maybe some tension between either party, their families, their friends, society at large, with how they can navigate the difficulties that come with that in a way that's healthy, in a way that leads to positive outcomes, and doesn't create any of these barriers that we tend to see when people aren't able to acknowledge their differences.
Yes, I think the one thing we've learned, and if there is anything that I can leave you with, it's make sure that it is just the two of you in the marriage. You know, loved ones and family members and friends and everybody will always have opinions and their own ways of doing things, and what's deemed as right and what's deemed as wrong, and what's deemed as socially accepted and what's not, you know. But at the end of the day, when all is said and done, it's the two of you in this relationship, and that's what matters, all right? So if you have chosen to be with this person, then you give yourself to this person, and you do everything you possibly can to make the relationship work. Be intentional about making that relationship work, okay? Because you've chosen that path, right? You've chosen this individual, whoever the person is. You've chosen that person. So make it work. And it requires work, all right? It's like going to the gym. You've got to show up and you've got to do the resistance training in order to strengthen those muscles. Well, it's the same in our relationships. Yes, go to other people for advice and for counsel and what have yous. But remember that you're not always going to hear what you're going to want to hear. What you hear isn't always going to be conducive to your relationship or helpful to your relationship. So at the end of the day, you're the ones that are going to have to make the decisions concerning your future, and leave it at that. Leave it at that. Don't be swayed by people's opinions. And because honestly, if we had allowed the people spitting in our faces to really penetrate our hearts, it could have actually destroyed our relationship. If we had gotten to the point where we had started questioning whether, wow, are we even right for each other? My goodness, that person spat in our face. That other person walked across the road. Goodness me, maybe he's not right for me. I mean, if I had even entertained that thought, there's no chance we would still be together today. So just be very, very careful that the advice that you get or the opinions that, get thrown on you aren't necessarily right for you, okay? But also, I do want to say this. Sandra and I have never imposed our relationship on other people, all right? To the point where we've wanted to make other people feel uncomfortable, okay? We didn't go out of our way to walk on that high street that day and for people to spit in our faces and for people to cross the road. We didn't go out of our way. And in fact, we didn't even stay. We didn't go to a cafe and sit in. We actually ended up leaving. And we thought, you know what? They obviously aren't in a position to receive us. So we're going to just slip away and just have breakfast, the two of us somewhere else. And that's okay. Like, protect what you have and don't allow, society or whatever to force their values or force their beliefs on you, and vice versa. We all have to live in this world. Why don't we all just get on? Well, the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we have respect for each other's space, respect for each other's decisions. What someone else decides for themselves might not necessarily be right for me, but it doesn't mean I'm going to now, spit them or, treat them like shite. What's that going to do? It's not going to be conducive or helpful to anybody, is it? So I think that's probably the biggest thing is just remember it's the two of you in this relationship, and that's where your focus needs to be then. Make that work. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. That's really fantastic. Just ensuring that it's the two of you and that you're communicating and that you're open and honest. I remember there being a quote that you used to say, and I can't remember exactly what it is, so I'll get you to remind me, but something about going to sleep on a thingy-mabob.
Yes.
Never let the sun set.
Never let the sun go down on your anger.
That's the one.
That's beautiful. That is honestly, and that's actually a scripture in the Bible, and we live by that. You can't go to sleep with matters unresolved. Deal with them. Sit up, put the lamp on, prop your pillows up, tell your gorgeous one, come on, sit up, we need to talk. We need to deal with this tonight. Because look, at the end of the day, you never know when your time is up. You could have a heart attack in your sleep and that'll be it. And the last thing you want is that having to live the rest of your life regretting that you didn't have closure and that you didn't settle matters. So yes, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Settle matters, okay? And hey, if you want to talk, or if you're navigating a challenging situation right now in your own life and you just want to, bounce it off us or just share with us what's going on, either drop a comment in the field below if you're watching this on social media, or flick me an email, info@nalini.tranquim.com. I hope today has helped. I love you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.